Some of the most effective advocacy for India's message against Pakistan on Operation Sindoor has come from opposition members of parliament. Shashi Tharoor, Manish Tewari, Asaduddin Owaisi, Salman Khurshid, to name just a few. Also Supriya Sule, Priyanka Chaturvedi, Kanimoi. This show of unity outside India has been very powerful, but it doesn't really square with the politics that have been unfolding at home. Nevertheless, certain individuals have appeared with distinction on the global stage. Congress Member of Parliament Manish Tewari is one of them, and in a moment from now, he'll be joining us live to take your questions and mine. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, we look at the effectiveness and the efficacy of the bipartisan delegations that have traveled across the world to global capitals to carry India's message against Pakistan and Pakistan's patronage of terrorism. Some of the key voices in these delegations have been members of the opposition. While India's presentation of a united front has been powerful, it hasn't stopped political squabbling at home, with the Congress in particular repeatedly targeting the Prime Minister. Rahul Gandhi said it was like Narendra had surrendered. I'm quoting him here before Donald Trump, referencing Trump's repeated claims that he had something to do with the halt in hostilities between India and Pakistan, something that has been fiercely rejected by India. But even as this political battle unfolds here in the home arena, outside India, some of the most effective voices, as I was mentioning, have been members of the opposition. Among them is Congress Member of Parliament Manish Tewari. Not many know that Manish himself is a victim of Pakistan, of terrorism. He lost his father to terrorism, and he has been one of the sharpest and fiercest voices against Pakistan. To talk about all that he has experienced in these last few days as he's traveled in that bipartisan delegation across the world, I'm joined by our newsmaker today, Congress Member of Parliament Manish Tewari is with us. Thank you so much, Manish, and job well done. I think you made a lot of us very, very proud, a lot of Indians very proud. Before we come to the geopolitics, I want to start with the personal account that you have experienced in your life. And I think you wrote about it in your most recent column as well in the New Indian Express. I know this, but I think a lot of people may not. That when you were very young, your father was killed by terrorists in his own home. Your mother was grappling with those terrorists, but as you write so movingly, the terrorists ran out of bullets and so they ran away. Otherwise, your mother could have also been shot dead by them. And this experience has informed your emotional but also your intellectual understanding of terrorism and its patrons. So, can we start before we get to your travels and the geopolitics with your personal experience as a victim of terrorism?
Barkha, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your show. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Punjab has unfortunately been a difficult place now going back many decades in time. In 1947, when the partition took place, it wasn't really the partition of India. It was the partition of Punjab and the partition of the province of Bengal. And between the two, Punjab actually got hurt the most because you had 2 million people who died between the July and September of 1947, another 20 million who were displaced, and therefore you had people on both sides of the Radcliffe line who started picking up the pieces of their lives and putting it together again. And that overhang of the partition, followed by the conflicts in 65 and 1971, especially 1971, when the West Pakistani army was very decisively defeated and Bangladesh was created, left an institutional scar on the collective psyche of the Pakistani military establishment. And they took two very seminal decisions on the 24th of January 1972. One, that they will metaphorically eat grass but acquire nuclear weapons. And number two, that they will bleed India with 1,000 cuts. And Punjab became the first frontier of that strategy towards the beginning of 1980. And all those people who stood for the syncretic ethos of Punjabiyat, of which my late father was one of the principal exponents, that was a direct ideological and conceptual challenge to the forces of extremism, separatism, who by then, by that point in time, had adopted terror as a way of intimidating and overawing the state. So on the 3rd of April 1984, my father, who was then a nominated member of the Rajya Sabha, he was a poet, he was an author, a professor of comparative modern Indian literature. He always kept an open house. So at about 6 in the morning, 3 people came and told our staff that they were his students from Patiala. He actually belonged to Patiala. And they wanted to see him. And so the lady, who was our person who used to look after the house, led them into the drawing room and made them sit down and informed my father. So when he came, I think one of them just took out his, actually apparently bowed down to touch his feet, and from near his ankle pulled out a pistol and shot him at point blank range 8 or 9 times. And so therefore, hearing those shots, my mother, who was happened to be in the next room or 2 rooms away, obviously rushed out to grapple with him. And she caught hold of him, and they kind of grappled for a while, and they threw her down, and they pointed the pistol at her, shot, but they were fortunately out of bullets. And so this happened in maybe a split of a second or a couple of minutes. And by the time my sister and I, who were upstairs in our bedrooms, came down, it unfortunately was all over. So yeah, I mean, in the sense that faith-based killings has been the standard playbook of the ISI, now going back 45 years.
And obviously that experience, and it's so unimaginably painful to even hear it. So I can't imagine what it was like to grow up knowing that that's how your father had been killed, that your mother may have also been killed, were it not for literally a sort of coincidence of fate in that moment. Obviously, this has deepened your understanding of terrorism and also your interest in studying it structurally. I don't know how many people know that outside of your life as a member of parliament and a lawyer, you spent a lot of time looking at the power structures in Pakistan and so on. So let's talk about what made what this bipartisan delegation actually meant to you, Manish.
Well, essentially, Barkha, for the first time, I think the story of Pakistan-inspired low-intensity conflict, which you have so ably covered over the decades, has to some extent been finally told to our interlocutors, perhaps in a more comprehensive and holistic manner than the bits and pieces on which it was done. It was done earlier. So I think we were able to reach out to our interlocutors, explain to them that this is not about Jammu and Kashmir, as is the popular Pakistani narrative around the terror which they perpetrate across the border. But this is all about the institutional humiliation that the Pakistani army still reels under and has not been able to surmount, going back to the creation of Bangladesh. So therefore, under those circumstances, the conflation between Pakistan's use of terror as an instrument of state policy, calling it a freedom fight, equating it with the Palestinian cause and other such causes around the world, I think to some extent we've been able to at least bust that myth that this has nothing to do with the narrative which they peddle. But obviously, this is work in progress. There would be counter narratives which Pakistan would put out. And so therefore, we'll have to keep working at it in order to try and create a global coalition against state-sponsored terror. Because as you know, the Comprehensive Convention on Terrorism has been languishing since the mid-90s in the United Nations. You can't find common language on what terrorism really means. So therefore, we try to draw a distinction between terrorism and not getting into the semantics of that, and the use of violence as an instrument of state policy by one state against the other. And I think to that extent, we possibly may have made some incremental headway.
So, Manish, let's first get to this really important point. It's a point you make in your column also, that a lot of the Western media likes to present what's happened as a dispute, in quotes, over Jammu and Kashmir. Like Jammu and Kashmir is a dispute, which it is not. But I think the really important point that you made in your column and that you made just now is that what has happened in Pahalgam, what has happened before that in 2611, and countless other examples has nothing to do with Kashmir. It is all about a structural inability in Pakistan's very roots and the inability of the Pakistan military to accept, what happened in 1971, for example. So my question to you is, what was the delegation like yours hoping to achieve? And do you think you managed to achieve it?
Well, essentially, I think the delegation had three objectives. The first objective is after the 99 Kargil conflict, which you so ably covered from the front lines, and one will see you every night with a helmet on your head, in the most difficult of places, and that was a very courageous thing to do. This was the sharpest exchange that we've had with Pakistan, which went on for good 96 hours between the night of the 7th, 8th of May and the evening of 10th of May. And obviously, people were concerned, right? When you have two nuclear weapon states exchanging missiles with each other, whether you like it or not, the whole world wakes up to take notice, because there are no institutional off-ramps between India and Pakistan. Once you're on an escalatory spiral, there is no climbing down. And so people wanted to, first of all, understand what happened on the 22nd of April 2025. Why was it an inflection point, given that India has been reeling under state-sponsored terror by Pakistan now for 45 years? Why was this kinetic action taken? And what is it that India hoped to achieve by this kinetic action? And ultimately, what is it that the delegation wanted to tell its interlocutors? And basically, what we were telling our interlocutors is that, look, we are a civilizational power. We've never invaded anybody in our long history. We do not believe in transgressing upon anybody else's sovereignty. But obviously, we have to protect our sovereignty, our territorial integrity. We can't allow our citizens to be mowed down. And therefore, it is very important that we start a global conversation to proscribe and isolate those states which have been using this as an instrument of state policy. And in the case of Pakistan, it frankly didn't need much convincing, because there's documented evidence of Osama bin Laden being found in Abbottabad. The fact even the Taliban has turned upon its original benefactors. There was the missile exchange between Iran and Pakistan in the January of 2024. So therefore, there was already so much of evidence which was there in the public space. All what one needed to do was to put some coherence onto it and really try and put it across in a comprehensive manner that Pakistan has been the epicenter of terror and regional instability. If you do not rein them in, given that the footprint of large terrorist incidents across the world all lead back to Pakistan, it's not only us who are in danger or who experience this. All of you have also experienced this in one way or the other. So the time has come, to walk the talk. So essentially, that was what the message was.
Now, you say that there wasn't even an iota of sympathy. There was reasonable awareness in certainly the countries you travel to. There's a great deal of debate taking place here at home over, did the delegations achieve what they were meant to beyond the symbolism of a united India? And two, the kind of statements that we've seen come from Donald Trump, not just doubling and tripling down, but repeatedly claiming a role for himself that India says he that he's absolutely wrong on. And it's quite clear by now that the military victories led to a turning point. The ravaging of the Pakistan air bases, the hitting possibly of the gate to a nuclear underground storage facility. These were turning points that make the Pakistan DGMO call our DGMO. But how do you address this debate that the battle was won, but the diplomatic narrative has taken a knock, primarily because of what the Americans have done and said?
Well, Barkha, the interesting thing is that you have a very peculiar person in the White House, to put it rather mildly. And therefore, the world is also cognizant about the very disparated statements that he keeps on making, not only in his second term, but also going back to his first term. So therefore, there is a lot of discount on what President Trump says. And as someone who's covered strategic affairs now for over three and a half decades, you know that back channeling in any crisis situation is a given. And when two nuclear weapon states decide to have a go at each other, obviously the world is not going to sit back and not be talking to both of them. So therefore, if anybody belabors under the impression that there is no back channeling going on almost concurrent to the conflict, I would say that's a very naive view to take. The difference between what happened in 1990, when Robert Gates came to India after Pakistan started flashing the N word in the wake of some mobilization that we had done in the western deserts of Rajasthan, and then on to Operation Parakaram, 2611, Uri, even Pulwama, Balakot, is that earlier people would keep quiet about it. Now you have an incumbent in the White House who believes that back channeling is front channeling. So there is that paradigm shift which you have to deal with, that there is a gentleman, unlike his predecessors, who is not happy that a crisis has got surmounted or a crisis has got mitigated to some extent, but obviously would like to chest thump and claim credit. Now, that's something which the whole world is dealing with. He's upended the entire global trading system with the tariffs that he has imposed. So, incidentally, in all our meetings, and we were doing something like 7 to 8 meetings a day or not more, there wasn't a single question about ostensible third-party mediation, because sophisticated interlocutors understand that there is a distinction between back channeling and mediation. And mediation is a far more formal process. Yes, there was mediation between India and Pakistan, in the 40s and the 50s, even in the 60s, when you had the United Nations resolutions and the United Nations group on Kashmir actually trying to take a more structured view of things. But after the Simla Agreement of 1972, the template has been bilateral. But having said that, crisis back channeling is a reality.
I'm so glad you've said it, because I think you have to remind people that even after 2611, when it was in fact Dr. Manmohan Singh's government that was at the helm, if you just do a cursory Google search, you will find that at the time, Pakistan's Shah Mahmood Qureshi happened to be in India. At that time, India was considering calling the ISI chief to India to make him account for what had happened in Mumbai. The Pakistan army then overruled that. David Cameron at the time was the guy working the phones to both countries. So this happens.
Absolutely.
It happens.
No, absolutely. Not only that, in fact, in an earlier column I had written last week, I had alluded to a statement by Robert Gates, who was then defense secretary. If you recall, he continued from Bush 43 to Barack Obama. That was the only appointment which was in continuing, because the US was involved with Afghanistan and Iraq at that point in time. And Robert Gates, in the January of 2010, this is about 14 months after 2611, when he was coming to India, publicly stated that the Indian leadership behaved with a lot of maturity and a lot of restraint after 2611. And obviously, he was talking perhaps from personal experience as someone who would have been involved in that back channeling process. And I'm sure this would have happened after Uri. It definitely did happen after Pulwama and Balakot, because you had President Trump in Hanoi, for the summit with Kim Jong Un, which did not take off. And if you read the account of the then Secretary of State, the gentleman who's lost a lot of weight, the name doesn't come to my head, who was also their director CIA, and John Bolton, who was the national security advisor, both of them said that they were working the phones with India and Pakistan. And Trump publicly announced that there will be soon good news from India, and both of them would be pulling back. So this is not really the first time it has happened, and that's why I said that now you have an incumbent in the White House who believes that back channeling is actually front channeling.
You've said it so lucidly, and I agree with you totally. But I'm going to ask you maybe what you might think is an awkward question. The leader of the Congress party doesn't understand what you have just explained. You have explained with great lucidity that mediation is very different from world leaders picking up the phone, especially when there is a military conflict unfolding between two nuclear powered states, right? In the last few days, the Congress, of which you are a member of parliament, and its leader Rahul Gandhi, have accused the Prime Minister of surrendering. The exact colloquialism was Narender Surrender. And the reference was Trump. And the Congress spokespeople have doubled down on that allegation. Before this, there was another bizarre allegation while all of you were outside doing your work, that Jaishankar had somehow given away war plans to Pakistan in advance, and therefore that might have led to the downing of Indian jets. I'm sorry for this awkward question, but I must ask you: do you find yourself at odds with your party and your leader?
Barkha, I would like to thank you for asking that question, because obviously, as a journalist, it's your duty and responsibility to ask the hard questions. The reality is that we've been in a very contested and a bitter political space now for the last 25 years. And every day, the acerbic and the bitterness in our political discourse only increases. And we are not willing to give or concede any space to each other, irrespective of whatever the issue may be. And so, therefore, while we were on this diplomatic outreach, I made it a point to shut my eyes and ears to the discourse back home, because I've also been a card-carrying member of that noise now for 2.5 decades as the spokesperson of the Congress. But when you are dealing with strategic affairs, and as someone who had experience of doing it outside the formal political space as a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., you try and put some perspective onto it. And therefore, that is what I've always been attempting to do. You see, there is a distinction between the fact that Pakistan now is a documented exporter of terrorism that has to be exposed. Number two, there are the internal dynamics of how the operations between the 7th and 8th of May 2025 and the 10th of May 2025 played themselves out. And the discourse around this, if you would recall, even the discourse around the Kargil war at that point in time, I'm talking about 25 years back, was very bitterly contested at home. And this bitter contestment is actually going to continue. It will find resonance when Parliament meets from the 21st of July onwards, and even beyond that. So, Mr. Vajpayee at that point in time, in order to deal with it in a more sober manner, decided to constitute the Kargil Review Committee. If I remember correctly, maybe you would also deposed before it at that point in time. And that was a very sophisticated attempt to put credible people to really do a post-mortem of what happened internally or how our handling of the war was. Right? So I think if, let's suppose, you have some structure of this kind which looks at the events which played out, not only for the purposes of political consumption. After all, even militarily, strategically, there are takeaways from the conflict which played itself out for 96 hours. So, what have we as a military, as a defense establishment, as a country, or even from the point of view of diplomacy, are the lessons or the takeaways so that we can do it better the next time? Because the fact that conventional deterrence has its limits when it comes to dealing with asymmetric warfare is a documented reality. If someone was to say that the next terror attack will not happen, you are being naive. How are we going to deal with this, and what are the lessons learned, is something which I think we should go into, not for the purposes of satisfying some political adversary, but more from the point of view of what the takeaways of this conflict were.
So, there's a one difference between the Kargil committee and what you're suggesting. The Kargil committee, the context in which, for example, Jairam Ramesh and others have asked for such an inquiry panel is in the context of what they call India's quote unquote isolation. Now, you just spent a long time telling me in this conversation that wherever you went, A, you got no questions on mediation because most people who are practitioners of this craft understand the difference between a Trump type person saying something and what actually happens behind the scenes. Two, you found that not even an iota of sympathy was there for Pakistan. You didn't come back home feeling that India was isolated. You have come back home feeling that there was actually some pretty sharp understanding of what Pakistan is up to. At the same time, you're making the point that conventional military responses are not always the effective answer to asymmetric warfare. If Pakistan has a congenital issue, then it's going to continue to have that issue because it's rooted in its very existence in the carving out of Bangladesh and so on. This is a very different thing from what the Congress is saying. The Congress is accusing the Prime Minister, the Modi government, and by extension, the Indian state of surrendering before Donald Trump. I'm taking it that you clearly do not agree with Rahul Gandhi on this.
Barkha, again, let me circle back to Kargil 1999. Despite the fact that that was a clear military victory for India, there were questions even at that point in time. Was there an intelligence failure? Were we not able to detect the Pakistanis when they came in and occupied the heights? What were the formations which were responsible for the protection of that area really doing? And why did we wake up so late? The initial responses were that we would get the heights vacated in 48 hours. It was a similar set of questions. Of course, every conflict produces its own unique set of questions, but the discourse was similar. Even in 2611, right? Was there an intelligence failure? Did we fail to detect those people who came in on boats? When they landed, why were they not picked up? Why did it take 96 hours to actually sanitize those hotels? It's been the very same set of questions over and over again. I think the more important thing that we need to ask ourselves is that if this has been happening for the past 25 years repeatedly, and I am no votary of the theory of intelligence failure, because the terrorists have to be lucky even only once. But in our case, if they've been getting lucky repeatedly, there is some systemic or structural problem that we should address. And it is from that point of view, from that context, I'm saying that there should be a credible set of people who should dispassionately and objectively dehorse the politics, go into these 96 hours or the entire sequence of events, starting with Asim Munir's speech. You see, because something which is neglected in this whole discourse is the dog whistle of 16th of April 2022. I mean, what was the need for Asim Munir to drag out the two nation theory, dust that apparition and give it fresh life? Was that the dog whistle which led to 22nd April? What really was the trigger behind that speech which came out of a blue? So I think we need to look at it rather than in a he said, she said manner, in a far more strategic manner. That's what my take is.
So, a wider strategic conversation on how do you, for example, we live in the age of drone warfare. Look what the Ukrainians have managed to do to the Russians. Tomorrow, what might happen if a Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist gets hold of drones? How do you contend or counter asymmetric warfare? How do you prepare yourself better for the next time? Because, as you said, Pakistan will try a next time. It's in their, it's just in their DNA. It's something you've written. All of this is fair, but Manish, when you see Dr. Shashi Tharoor being publicly tagged on social media platforms like X by his colleagues, telling him that he's got his facts wrong, or you see Salman Khurshid being having to sort of defend himself because he spoke about Kashmir being like part of the family, and he defended the abrogation of Article 370 and the situation on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir after that. I'm sure you've had your own share of barbs from within colleagues or on social media from Congress supporters. How does it feel bad? Does it feel like you're not on the same page as your party? Do you feel like, you've taken a knock for the country, but your party is going to give you a knock or two?
Well, Barkha, that's par for the course. You see, as I earlier pointed out, the bitter, contested political space that we live in,
Yeah.
it becomes difficult to surmount and take a more objective or a more dispassionate view. And as someone who's now been a student of strategic studies for almost 3 decades, I think it is our responsibility, also as parliamentarians, to try and rise above that noise and really take a view which is in larger national interest. And I frankly understand that if certain colleagues have, a certain level of bile about some of us as spokespersons, possibly they are doing their job, but that's noise. We should just discount that, leave it aside, and focus on something which is far more serious. You see, you mentioned Russia, right? And
Yeah.
drone warfare. Now, Russia lost aeroplanes, right?
Yeah.
In the
Yeah.
sense, the Ukrainians came in and with $130 drones, destroyed strategic long-range bombers. Russia has now been in conflict for the last 3 years. But the Russians very upfront said, yes, there has been an attack on our airfields. We've lost some planes. The attack is not of the magnitude as the Ukrainians are claiming. 1, 2, 3 places were not hit. 4, 5, 6 places were hit, and those are the facts. You see, when you are in a conflict with someone, obviously you are going to hit, and the other person is going to hit, and you may lose certain assets. After all, you didn't buy them to keep them in the museum as toys. You've used them in a conflict, and in a conflict, there are gains and there are losses. But overall, at the end of the day, if you've been able to achieve your strategic objectives, that is what really matters. And that's why I'm saying a broader holistic view of what transpired and what the future holds for us is very important.
If you were to meet Mr. Rahul Gandhi and debrief him on your visit and urge the party to take a certain line, what would that line be?
Well, first of all, in my understanding, Mr. Gandhi has a fairly sophisticated understanding of strategic affairs. It's not as if he is someone who is not cognizant of the reality which is so intrinsic now to the times that we live in. But there is also the contested political reality. So at some point in time, you really need to find an equilibrium between the two.
Just to push a last question on this and then ask you a bigger picture question. You are not upset or bothered by the bile that some party members or supporters may direct towards you?
Actually, Barkha, having been there and done it now for 2.5 decades, and after having done it for 15 hours with, very experienced and accomplished and distinguished journalists like yourself, you now can sit back and really laugh at it
Yeah.
when someone has a go at you. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no skin on my back.
Yeah. Uh, I want to end with a big picture question. A lot of conventional India Pakistan scholars in India, when they're looking at the challenges from Pakistan, tend to argue that a stable Pakistan is in India's interest. Um, you have argued the opposite in your writings after Pahalgam. You have said that it is actually time for India to relook that assumption and look at, for lack of a better word, the dismemberment of Pakistan, because, as you have said in this conversation also, conventional military responses under the nuclear overhang can inflict pain and penalty on Pakistan, but they cannot eliminate asymmetric warfare. They cannot, right? Because you can hit the bases of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, they'll cultivate two more bases. We just saw the Punjab speaker in Pakistan call Hafiz Saeed a man who has done great things for Pakistan, and how he said he's like my family member. So that is Pakistan. You have argued quite aggressively that it's time to relook this old cliche that a stable Pakistan is in India's interest. So I want you to end with talking about that.
You're absolutely right, Barkha. All of us grew up believing, and I was no exception,
Yeah.
that a stable Pakistan is a politically coherent Pakistan is in India's interest. Right? All of us grew up believing, and rightly so, that while the civilian leadership in Pakistan does not want a conflict, it is the deep state in Pakistan, the military, the ISI, the semi-state actors that they spawn, who are not able to surmount that institutional humiliation of 1971. But at some point in time, the political leadership will prevail. Pakistan would become a normal state, not a military which has a state, but a state which has a military, and we would be able to live like neighbors.
Mhm.
But somehow, what happened in Pahalgam, and of course, in terms of the numbers of lives lost, even one life lost is too many, but in a very cold-hearted calculus, the number of lives lost were actually much lesser than what had happened in previous such terror incidents. But the manner of executions, the blatant faith-based executions which were perpetrated with a message to the families that take this back to your political leadership. Uh, it's like a jackal who's not able.
Oops. We just lost Manish as he was making that very important concluding remark. I'm hoping that he will reconnect. But I want to talk a little bit about what he was just saying. He was talking about how, oh, there you are. There you are. I was just summarizing your closing remark, that how we all used to think that one day Pakistan will become a normal state. And you said that there was something about Pahalgam, the way sort of the communalization of it, joining the dots to Asim Munir's speech just before that, that has made you reevaluate this thought that Pakistan is ever going to normalize, and whether a stable Pakistan is indeed in India's interests.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the sense, like I was earlier pointing out, all of us, have been very strong votaries, and that is why the track 1.5, 2, 3, 4 engagements that all of us participated in,
Yeah.
thinking that there would be a day when we would be able to live like normal neighbors. There's the civilian leadership would gain control over the military establishment. But after what they did to Imran Khan, not only deposed him, but in the manner in which they have completely squelched his political party, and the fact that they have gone back to their default DNA, I seriously believe that we should revisit this proposition.
And what would revisiting this proposition entail? If I'm not wrong, one of your early columns after Pahalgam actually said that India has to review looking at its neighbor as one, maybe it's time for another Bangladesh moment, let me say it bluntly.
Well, Barkha, it is not going to happen by the force of arms. If you look at it, the ceasefire line on the western border, which was created as a consequence of the Karachi Agreement, has barely moved in all these decades. We may have had spectacular successes on the eastern border, but on the western border, the movement has been very incremental, and ultimately we settled both in 65 and 72 and swapped whatever territory that we had taken from each other. It is really the internal contradictions in Pakistan, and those internal contradictions are getting sharper by the day. That is not a state which is going towards coherence. That is a state which is going towards incoherence, chaos, and instability. And that's the process that we should watch very, very carefully, because that seems to be heading towards a natural denouement.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, Manish. We leave it there with me just repeating that I'm glad that there are still thinking, sort of thoughtful articulations, even in this bitterly politically contested environment that you referred to, that speak to your experience, your years of having studied this space, and also your personal history as a victim of terrorism. I would say that Indians across party lines will say to you that you did a great job and you made us all proud. Thank you very much, Manish Tewari, for speaking to us.
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you very much. As always, it's enlightening to have a conversation with you. And there are not many quiet conversations which are left in our public space. Kudos to you.
Thank you, Manish. Take care. See you soon.
Bye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.